Hey everyone, and welcome to the Doctors of Running podcast, where we, a group of doctors of physical therapy, talk about the art and the science of the things that we put on our feet. Today, I'm honored to have Dr. David Salas and Dr. Brown with me. I, of course, am Matt, and we are going to have an episode that is going to be a little surprising for Nathan and David because they actually have no idea what I'm about ready to do, which is exactly how I love operating, where nobody knows what's about ready to happen.
I'm so scared.
Which is typical of my improvisation, which hasn't really come out a lot on this podcast.
Let me cut in for a second. Yeah. Earlier today, Matt says, wait, I got an idea. I'll lead it tonight. And we're like, what? And he's like, you'll find out when we're recording. So literally the only thing Matt told us was go grab a couple shoes. And we're like, okay. And he's like, all right, here we go. And so now we're here.
And then we log on and like, hey, Matt, what's up? And he's like, then he just lays in like 3 pun jokes at us. And then it's like, all right, we're recording.
Time to record.
So I should have thrown you guys off more, but had like way more like inappropriate jokes and like set you guys like on like really a lot of tension going into this, but it won't be that bad.
Is this your stand-up special? Is that what we're here for?
This is going to be my stand-up special. I'm going to really lay in New Balance. If you're listening, the joke about the more versus the less series, I'm going to like double down on this right now. And if you haven't heard that joke before, you should go listen to other episodes because it's fire. Anyway. The purpose of tonight is actually serious. And so we talk a lot about things related to footwear and finding optimal shoes for you. We talk a lot about things like the RunCat scale. We talk a lot about trying to help people understand how their own bodies are unique and that one shoe is not going to fit everyone. And there is no such thing as the best shoe, but there might be some better shoes for you as an individual. So tonight, I thought it would be, or today, or whatever time you're listening to this, I thought it would be interesting to have the three of us, and especially these two, go through what they look for when they're trying to find a shoe that really works for them. We're in a very privileged position where we get to test a lot of stuff and we have a lot of stuff coming at us. But when it actually comes to like race day, for example, or really going out on training runs where we actually want to enjoy things, I really wanted to explore what that looked like because we spend so much time talk to you about it. I wanted to have a little deeper look into how we do this. So
okay, this isn't as bad as I thought it was going to be.
What did you think I was going to do?
I just had no idea, but I feel like I could do this. I think.
Okay, got it. See, you didn't need that. You didn't need to prep for this. You're gonna be fine, right? You're good.
Maybe.
Okay. I grabbed some like deep cuts from like a long time ago.
Sweet. So all I told them was grab some shoes that you've really enjoyed either previously or currently, because I want to help our listeners figure out the process that you all go through when you're actually trying to find something you want to run in. There's a difference between when you're testing something, which sometimes you are going to want to run it. Sometimes you're absolutely not, and we still get miles on it. But I want to help people figure out what that process and kind of demo that so they actually have a better idea of what the actual process looks like for all of us. Sound good? All right. So we are going to start with a simple question. When you are looking for a shoe, not for testing purposes, you've either got a race coming up, you've got a half marathon, you've got a marathon, you've got some race, or you've got a longer training run. You're like, I don't really want to be testing something right now. I really want to put something on that I can trust. When you're going through that process, does the RunCat play any role in making that decision? For clarification, and not to interrupt you too, for those that are new, the RunCat is the running comfort assessment tool, which we've talked about quite a bit. That's got a couple different domains that's supposed to help people figure out, based on comfort, which is one of the biggest predictive factors of whether a shoe is going to work for you. It's got a couple areas, including stiffness, stability, like rigidity, flexibility, and things like that we've talked about before. But we reference it a lot. But how does that influence your initial decisions, or does it?
That's a great question. I think if people are interested in hearing more, Matt, you did a solo episode on the RunCat, so you should be able to go in our archive and find some details. I would say that there are a couple factors within the RunCat that I instinctively go towards. I wouldn't say I pull out my RunCat and make my decisions based off of it, but there are a couple things. Primarily for me, the things that I'm like, oh, I want a shoe that I like is just a longer run right now. So like anything an hour or over, for me, it feels longer right now. And that's when I'm going to a shoe that I'm really going to trust. And I would say that the two main things that I'm looking for right now is the feeling of forefoot cushioning and the amount of space in the toe box. So I want to make sure I have enough room partially because of what I've been dealing with my toe. But then I really have found that I like a just right balance of the cushioning in the forefoot, which I think is paired with something that's not directly assessed in the RunCat, which is the rocker profile and the stiffness in the front. I think is not exactly hit with the RunCat. Matt, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think mostly that cushioning in the forefoot is what I look for. And I like a lot of forefoot cushioning. I don't want it to be plush, but I like that kind of like medium, kind of on the firmer end of soft. And I like to be able to feel it in the forefoot with a little bit of a rocker, but I want it to have some flexibility to it. So that's the RunCat does guide me. And I would say though, but not with the RunCat in front of me, but instinctively those aspects of it I go toward.
David, what about you?
Yeah, I'm going to be entirely honest. I can't remember the last time I've run a RunCat on any shoe that I've worn. It's been a while, but with that said, looking at it from a subjective standpoint, a lot of the things that it attempts to do, I do resonate with some of those metrics. And like how you're saying, like forefoot flexibility, and they don't really have rocker profile, whatever, that's fine. But the general idea of having something that's comfortable on your foot that you trust, that, and again, like you said, we're fortunate to have so many shoes. And like when you have as large of a pool to pull from that we do, you start to get a sense of what you like. And in those situations, that's when I do gravitate towards things that I am more comfortable with. And in some ways that should parallel some of the metrics that are on said RunCat. When I have so many different usages, I feel like, for my shoes. And so it's a hard question to answer because when I look at daily running, I'm a little bit boring. I like a little, I'm very moderate. I feel like if you give me
you want a GT 2000.
I want a GT 2000. And the year before that, a Ride 16, and like
yes,
Gran
exactly.
Turismo 2000, by the way.
Yeah, I was right on that too. I called that. I was like, I think Grand Tour like a car. And we were right. Or I was right.
We reached out to ASICS to find out what the GT actually stood for because we had a couple ideas and we just wanted to confirm. And so we learned.
We did learn.
Yep.
Gran Turismo.
So, but it's, what's that?
So what I'm hearing from, and we'll get into the individual components in just a second, but what I'm hearing from both of you is that Nathan, for example, you're saying, yes, maybe not exactly, but it's that, I am following certain parts of it, whether intentionally or unintentionally. There's things that I just look out for that happen to match what that kind of goes through. And David, you're exactly the same, or not exactly the same, but you're saying, I don't necessarily think I'm going to go through the categories, but you're like, the things that I'm looking for anyway just happen to line up with that. And the reason I bring this up is we talk about this, but you don't have to live and die by this. It's not like this is the end all. It's a great tool. And I think it's especially effective for the newer runner who you're going to get very overwhelmed by all the different metrics, the advertising, the things coming at you. And to be honest, I think shoes today are kind of crazy. Like when you put if you hadn't ever tried a running shoe and you put half of the stuff that's out there on your foot, you'd be like, this is a lot of stimulus. Like, I don't even know what to think about this. So I think the new runner is going to be very helpful using this as a guide. But as you progress, you will find unique things that really work out for you. And that will still likely be pieces of this, but it doesn't mean you have to really stick to that you'll find things that work for you. But I think it's a great place to start and create a foundation to build off of what works for you.
I think to your point about shoes these days feeling crazy, if you're listening to this podcast, you're probably like, do they really though?
Yeah.
But I have a friend who just ran his first marathon yesterday, and he didn't start running until January. And so he came to me in January and said, my friend convinced me to sign up for a marathon. And my first question to him after I signed up was, wait, how far is this? That's how much he knew about running. So then
I'll do it.
He spent the whole year trained and he ran awesome. But partway into the summer, so when he had like 4 months left, he's like, it's time for me to get a new shoe. What should I get? I told him a couple options of what he could consider. He ended up buying the Endorphin Speed. And before that, he was running in the Brooks Revel. He was running in a Brooks Launch. He had one other shoe. Oh, like the Nike Peg Nature, I think it's called, or whatever. So he had a number of options, and he got those shoes and he took them out of the box. And before he even put them on his feet, he's like, "Is this even real?" Because it felt so light it was like, he's like, is this just going to break in my hand? He's like, is this even going to hold up? And then he texted me, he put them on and he ran in them the next day. And he's like, it feels like I'm being vaulted forwards. And I think that when you've been in the running shoe geek space for long enough and you've ran in these shoes, we forget how different they are from other footwear that are a little bit more traditional in running. And so it's just, I think you're spot on with that consideration, Matt, of like, what should we be looking for? And maybe the RunCat is a tool, but I also think that it does miss that propulsive rocker. Like that won't get hit with the RunCat as it currently stands.
David, any thoughts?
Yeah, shoes are crazy. I mean, honestly though, right? Like, I mean, you think about it, it wasn't that, well, I guess it's been a little bit of time now. What, Vaporfly debuted in 2016?
2016, 2017.
2017.
Yeah. And then you look forward 2-3-ish years by the time you actually start seeing other product on the market that are kind of starting to match it. And I remember actually, it's funny you bring up Endorphin Speed, because I remember specifically putting on Endorphin Speed 1 and Endorphin Pro 2 for the first, or Endorphin Pro 1 for the first time, and feeling like, whoa, this is different. You know, and I hadn't had a Vaporfly to that point. I don't believe. I didn't have the original 4% at that time. You did give me one model of the Flyknit version of it. And then there was also the Next Percent, which had just come out, I think, right around that time. And I hadn't had my hands on that either. And I just remember being like, this is crazy. You know, like that propulsive feeling, how light it was, how soft it was once you put on your foot. Like I just took a step walking and being like, what the heck is this? Yep. You know, and now fast forward, you know, several years later, and it's like, oh, like, and again, we're very fortunate to be in the position that we are in, but you get a shoe and you put it on and you're like, oh yeah, this feels like this shoe. Oh yeah, this feels like that. Like, oh, this is reminiscent of that. Like, it's not like this novel experience that we get anymore on some of this newer technology. Right. And like, that's not just the racing models. Like there are so many high stack, like these super trainers, these crazy stacks, like crazy compliant, bouncy plated, hyper rockered shoes. Like that was not around that long ago. And so, especially if you're new to running, especially like if you're used to just walking around in Vans and like normal shoes, and then you go and you put one of those things on, you genuinely feel like you're in moon boots. And that's what a lot of people that's usually the word they say a lot of times. Like, I feel like I'm in moon boots. And
to tie
it's just a novel experience. And it genuinely is a wild experience for a lot of people if they aren't in that space already.
Yeah, I think another shoe in the training sphere, when I first tried it on, I felt like I was going to fall on my face, was the original Glide Ride. And that was an early adopter of these training shoes with a pretty significant stiffer rocker because they had the plastic plate in there. And I just remember putting it on and be like, whoa, what is going on? And I did a 10 miler. My first run in that shoe was a 10 miler. And it was like the fastest 10 miler I've ever done. And I hadn't learned how to run in the shoe yet. I feel like I didn't learn how to run in stiffer rockered shoes. And now I put on these crazy stiff rockered shoes and I'm like, oh, okay, I know how to run in this. But I think that there was an adoption period to figure out what that was like. But now, you know, it makes me think about our reviews too, and how we talk about our rocker profiles and how aggressive it feels. And it depends on who the person is probably coming to the shoe and if they're used to rockers or not. Because if they're not, the more mild rocker, which I would call the Endorphin Speed 4, like a little bit more mild in comparison to some of these other ones that exist. But then my friend has this like, holy cow, what is this like rocket on my foot that's just pushing me forward? There's a lot of subjectivity in there.
Yep. And this is something that we are constantly trying to figure out how to better communicate to anybody that reads or listens to our reviews, because we are acutely aware that our sample size of what we tested is quite large, and those that don't have a lot of running experience are going to have very different sensory experience with putting some of the stuff on compared to those who have run extensively in it, which is still exciting. We get something we're like, whoa, like what is this? There's only an N of 1 here. Like what? So that doesn't happen as often, but it's cool when it does. But that's off topic. So what I'm hoping to do is piece by piece, and I will acknowledge that I know we don't necessarily think exactly like this, but subconsciously I think this is still happening. I'd like to go through piece by piece parts of the shoe and have you both talk us through what you are looking for when you put a shoe on. How do you know if it's something that's going to work for you, or if it's going to be something that's going to be struggle, or if you're like, I just can't run in this. I want to be able to pick apart how you get through and process this stuff to give the listeners and viewers a better idea of the process that you have developed over time with this much experience. So let's start with the upper. The major reason for the upper is if you are typically, when you're trying shoes on, if you're in a store, if you're at home, typically you're going to put them on while you're sitting. Not many people put them on while standing. I'm not judging if you do, but the first thing you're going to feel is how they fit. So if you don't mind, one of you start and talk us through, when you put the shoe on, what are you looking for when that gets on your foot in terms of the heel, midfoot, forefoot, the width, the volume, whatever metrics you use, however quickly it is, talk us through what that looks like when you put something on.
Do you want to go or me?
I can start, I guess.
I'm good either way. Yeah.
I'll save the better for later. So I'll go first, get it myself out of the way. I think one of the big things that I look at for fit is, as David knows, I'm a lace snob. So
I thought you were going to say tongue snob.
And I'm a tongue snob too.
I was going to put a little jab in there if I went first.
Yeah,
I'm not going to lie.
I'm not judging at all. I am definitely a tongue snob. If it's not gusseted, if it's not the right thickness, like I'm upset. I totally get it.
No, but I think one of the main things from the heel perspective is I don't like something that my heel can get lost in. So if it's really, really padded, and I pick shoes that I like, so I don't have any here that have the extreme padding. But I'm thinking back to I think it was the Gel Nimbus 24, super padded heel, but then it had a super thin tongue, and it felt really like I couldn't get my foot to be where it should be in the heel. So that fit is important to me. I like just a very moderate amount of cushioning. And then I think the other big thing is I want to be able to pull the laces. And when I pull the laces, my foot feels secure. I don't like to have to mess with it, which is what my biggest issue was with the Adidas Boston 12, because the lacing system was weird. And so I had to really play with it to get my foot to lock in. And it just didn't feel comfortable. So for training days, I want to slide it in and just feel like my foot's exactly where it needs to be. All I need to do is pull on those top two laces or just cinch up a little bit and it feels good. Usually that means a moderate amount of cushioning through the heel. I'm okay with a heel counter. It doesn't bug me if there is one, or if there's one that's a little bit more soft. And then the tongue width that's ideal for me is thin, but with some level of padding. So I like this, the Nova Blast 5 has a good amount of padding. And then this one, the Elios from 361, has a little bit more padding in the tongue. Both of those are solid. They're both gusseted. And then the other big thing for fit is, again, for me in the forefoot, I don't want any squeezing from the sides, which most shoes don't result in a lot of squeezing for me. But there have been some in this past year that the volume has been so low, just at what, I don't know if this is called the throat or the outlet or whatever it's called, but right as the shoe transitions from the end of the laces into the toe box, if that's tight over your foot, you can't adjust that area, and there's usually not as much stretch. So for me, I just want to make sure that I just shouldn't feel anything there. So long story short, I shouldn't feel anything. When I put the shoe on, I should feel my foot's there, and I don't notice anything in particular. There's a shoe that I put on today. It's a training shoe for Ultra, super tight around this kind of outlet into the toe box. I wish I knew the term for that, but it's just really snug and you can't loosen it at all. And so I couldn't change it. So that's what I look for. David, what do you got?
Yeah, I feel like we're kind of similar in a lot of ways there. I'm not a tongue or a lacing snob, but I do like my foot to be locked into the platform. That I do like. And there have been several shoes that I have enjoyed the platform, the foam, the ride. But if the fit just doesn't quite work, then I can't use it. And if my heel's moving around or things like that, the upper is very, very important, especially when you start teasing hairs here, and you are splitting hairs and you're looking at okay, which one should I purchase? Especially some of these shoes are getting upwards of $200 now, right? So when you start splitting hairs, it's like, okay, which one am I more comfortable in? And now you got to really look at those little things, because those things can easily be deal breakers once you're 50 miles into a shoe. But we talked about it, but I'm a little bit boring, and thankfully my foot, I don't need a bunch of forefoot width. I'm not super sensitive to that. I know a lot of people really like wide toe boxes. I like them. I mean, one of my shoes here is a topo, but like I don't have to have it. What I do like is kind of like a very moderate package. I don't mind a heel counter. It can be there, it can not be there, but I do want my heel secure. And I won't really know that until I'm standing and moving around. That I'm not really going to know that on a static fit. But I like a moderately padded tongue. I mean, I have the Topo Cyclone 2 here, and that I would say is definitely kind of moderate all the way around. This one is on the lighter side. I mean, it's like, what, 6.7 ounces or something, men's size 9? Like, this is a pretty light shoe. But the shoe itself, like the upper material has a tiny bit of stretch to it, but it holds itself pretty well. That I also like that. I like an upper to break in a little bit. And if I can have a sense about that initially, where it's like, okay, it's not overly plush, it's not overly narrow, it feels like it might break in a little bit, then I'm good. I kind of like a slightly snug fit initially. So like the GT 2000, it's a little bit of a snugger fitting upper, but it does break in. And it's not like the second I put it on where I was like, oh my God, this is tight. I didn't have that feeling. Like it held my foot, but I could tell it was going to break in a little bit. And some of that's probably experience, but on the other end, it's also like, it's not so tight that it's a deal breaker. Like it just feels like it's holding me. And so when it does break in, I'll just have a little bit of space. You know what I mean? Like, it's not like I'm going to be lax and flopping around. Like I know it's going to be fine. And then like the other things too, when I look at the materials on that shoe, none of it's overly plush. It's a very, very moderate approach to shoes. The most plush thing I got here is probably the Vomero, and the Vomero still, I would argue, is on the moderate side. It's like the tongue is on the thicker side, but otherwise the heel collar, the padding around the counter, like it's a very, very moderate approach. And so I'm kind of boring. I kind of like just a traditional to slightly lightweight build. I've kind of struggled, and you guys know this, with some of like the more plush, like premium options when it's really soft underfoot. And we'll go into the ride later, I'm sure, but I've struggled with some of those. I definitely kind of lean more to your just bread and butter traditional type trainers.
So what I'm hearing so to summarize, Nathan, you are looking for specific things. So the forefoot width is and volume is very important to you to make sure that you're not getting any pressure in that front area, but also you're still looking in the tongue and heel to make sure, do you feel like you actually have good security without probably getting too much pressure too? Like the tongue's got to be just right, so those laces aren't biting on you. You've got to feel like that heel's nice and secure without being too pressurized, but just like you're not swimming in it. David, what I'm hearing from you is there's a more kind of general piece that you're looking for. Is this within this spectrum that I know I like? Is it just this moderate level, not too plush, nothing too crazy? And also just experience going, is it going to fit just right? Is it just the right amount of material? But also, do I know, is this going to adapt to me as I wear this? It's not just, this is going to be the how it is, but is this going to change it? Am I going to like that change? Is that a correct summarization of what you two are thinking? And when you put stuff on and you're looking for that optimal fit for you?
Yeah, I would say the other thing too is looking at volume and general fit. Like I don't want to feel like I have to like really pull those laces to make sure the foot's on my foot. If I feel that initially, like, and again, I'm going to know that more once I stand up, but you can get a general sense, when you're putting it on and you're like, that doesn't feel quite right. And if I have to really start cranking on that, then it's like, okay, that takes some of the fun away from the shoe.
Yep. Yeah, in general, if there is anything from the upper that I feel like is jettisoning itself into my foot, I'm like, this just isn't quite right. I know that this isn't a shoe I would buy. Like I would say there's a very quick switch I could flip if I were in a store. That'd be like, oh yeah, this is not the one for me, just because it takes a little bit too much to get it to be somewhat comfortable, but I always feel something pushing somewhere. The shoe of the century when it comes to fit is the Topo Magnafly 4, not the 5, the 4. It was amazing. It just ticked all the boxes.
That shoe.
I love that upper. I love that upper. The shoe's fine. I do like the shoe, but it's a really great upper. It's got that moderate padding all the way around, super secure through the midfoot. I think midfoot security is my key. I am okay with like the slightest little bit of heel slippage as long as the midfoot is secure, which might be a unique thing to me. And then just opening up into that part of the toe box for volume. I say that about slippage because a shoe that I actually don't totally hate is the Invincible 3 from Nike. Really nice ride. It's got like some security through the midfoot, but my heel slips all the time. Like I cannot get it secure, but the midfoot's good enough where I did put a lot of miles in that when I was testing it. So, but yeah, I agree with David. Upper fit is super important.
And right, for me, it's heel.
Nathan read my mind.
Heel.
Yeah,
Nathan read my mind because I was going to ask what's like the best upper that you felt in a while. So yours was the Topo Magfly 4. And you just kind of explained why. David, what's the best upper that you can think about recently and why? What key features popped out to you that made it that best for you?
Yeah, that's a tough one. You know, there's so many good ones out there. I think in recent times, honestly, probably the GT 2000. I mean, I've been talking at length about that shoe now at this point. It almost feels monotonous, but like I said, bread and butter trainer. There's really nothing overly crazy about this thing. It's slightly snug when you put it on the first time. It breaks in to be normal fitting. You know what I mean? And it's just, I don't know. It's a moderately padded tongue. The laces are on the softer side, so when you do pull them down, it doesn't really hurt. That's not a good word for that, but it doesn't really. It doesn't. It's not really
as painful as usual.
It doesn't really bite down much. Yeah, I very, very rarely get any pain from shoes, so that was not a good choice of words. But the heel collar, very moderately padded. When we look at the width, again, it's kind of just in the middle all around, right? Like it's not really like a narrow heel, you know, it's just kind of a moderate heel. You have just a nice little encasing around the heel and the midfoot, very, very moderate across the entire shoe. The forefoot, I would maybe slightly wide, but it's on the more normal side of fitting. And then on the midfoot, same thing. And so it just kind of hugs the foot. The engineered mesh I find to be really comfortable, but it's not overly plush. You know, if you look for like, let's say a Nimbus or a Kayano, if you're talking within the ASICS line, like they have just a lot more going on those uppers. And this is kind of just a very standard basic upper. And that's one of the things I liked a lot about the Cyclone too. It's one of the things I liked a lot about the Endorphin Speed. It's like, they're kind of minimalist-ish. Right. Mm-hmm. Like they still have padding. They're not like a racing upper, but they have just enough around it to just hold your foot and, you know, very middle of the road. I'm kind of boring on that way. I wish I could tell you that like, oh yeah, give me the wide toe box, give me the most plush, double jacquard, whatever mesh upper you can give me. Like I'm not that guy.
You can say consistent instead of boring.
Yeah.
Might be the more appropriate term.
Yeah, I mean, it's a bread and butter shoe to put on your foot with decent comfortability that you can log mile after mile with forgetting about it, right? Like if a shoe does its job well, you don't have to think about the shoe. That's kind of how I think. And
so a word of wisdom that you might, correct me if I'm wrong on this, I'm going to make a statement and let me know if you agree or disagree on it. The point of what you're looking for in an upper is you honestly just want this thing to disappear, right? You want it to be secure enough, not so much it's crunching your foot, and you want to be able to honestly not notice it and almost feel like it's not something that's coming into your mind as you're running.
Yeah, 1000%. If I have to think about how my foot's landing, that's a problem.
Yeah.
You know,
and there's slightly different things that you two are looking for, but that seems to be the key theme is just making sure, as Nathan said, making sure nothing's pushed into your foot. As you said, it's not too thick. It's not giving you weird things. It's just, can I just put this on and go run?
Yeah, and I will say the one thing I've been sensitive to once, because we talked about fit from a static standpoint, but once we start running, I am sensitive to heel slippage, whether it's like my heel rising or my heel moving. And it's more so like the translation medially and laterally that I've found that I've been more sensitive to in recent years than anything. And I don't know why. Like, I don't know if that was something that I used to overlook, and maybe now I'm just getting a little older and more sensitive. I don't know, but like for whatever reason, like that is one of the things I'm noticing right away, especially when the pace picks up. And there's a shoe specifically I can talk about with that. But yeah.
Nathan, do you have anything?
I was just going to do one quick note on like type of material. So I'm with David too. I want it to be pretty simple. Though the 3 shoes I have on the table right now, and I have more down there, but all have different types of uppers. So like the Nova Blast 5, there's definitely layers to this. The inside is just like a very typical mesh, and then they have kind of a more synthetic mesh on the outside. I tend to like that because I like the feeling of just like those more traditional engineered mesh materials because they're softer, comfortable, but I don't hate synthetic because it helps it hold its shape a little more, it seems like, while still having some stretch. And like the design here, I don't know if people can see, but it does stretch laterally through the lacing system, which I think is nice. And then I pick up the next shoe and it's a little bit more of an engineered upper. It almost looks like a knit upper in the Deviate 3 from Puma. And again, it's really comfortable and soft. There's a layer of kind of, a softer, slightly synthetic material, but still pretty simple feeling. Like it feels simple. And then the third one is like the most traditional type upper that I feel like this was the upper that you would see back even in like 2015, 2016 on the Ilios. And I think it works great. Like, I don't think you need something fancy, especially for training. I'm not a huge fan of shoes that feel overly synthetic only, unless it's strictly for like a race day thing. But I think there was a trend towards some of that synthetic stuff for a while. I'm particularly thinking about like some of the Adidas stuff that came out a couple of years ago. And I feel like we're seeing some more traditional mesh materials. And I guess I don't care that much is what I'm saying, as long as it's comfortable.
I don't know. That was a lot of type dropping to not care that much.
I know. It's true.
So big things to take away from our talk about the upper is that it's going to vary slightly for different people. Some people like a little bit more cush. Some people like a little bit more moderate. Some people like a little less. The biggest things that you should be looking for is when you put that shoe on, you shouldn't be getting any hot spots, any weird things, no things pushing in. It should fit your foot. You should have plenty of room. You shouldn't feel like your foot's getting smashed. There should be enough room while things stay secure. The other piece of advice I would have that David mentioned is make sure that whatever shoe that you're trying on, that you test it with the activity that you're actually going to be using it for. So if you're trying on a running shoe, it's not going to be a great idea to just stand there and try to make a decision. You're going to need to run around the store or whatever situation you're in to go, how does this feel in motion? We have very good evidence that many parts of the human body and other things that static measurements and analyses often do not relate to what things feel like or look like dynamically. So make sure if you're going to try to figure out if this is going to work for you, make sure you move in it, make sure you run in it and test it out appropriately. How much you'll be able to test it will probably vary depending on the manufacturer and the store that you're going to or at home with, but just make sure you give yourself enough time to figure out, does this work and does it move with me is the recommendation I think I'm hearing. So let's move on to the sole. And so I'll give you a little outline. So either one of you can start first. But once you've gotten past the upper, that fit, what are you looking for in what's under your feet, right? What kind of sensation you're looking for? How you expect, what do you want the ride to be in terms of how the midfoot or the rear foot or heel, midfoot, forefoot? Nathan, you've talked a little bit about forefoot geometry. What are you looking for from a cushioning standpoint, from a stability or stiffness standpoint? However you want to organize this, whatever you do, what do you do?
Yeah, I guess I can go first since you went first on the last one. When I think back on a lot of the shoes that I've liked, and this isn't always the case, but I kind of do fall back on a little bit of a traditional build a lot of the time. A little bit of a higher drop ratio, a little bit of a more flexible forefoot, usually a little bit of a firmer platform. Nowadays, I mean, shoot, man, you take any shoe from today's market, even if it's on the firmer side, that's going to be soft if you compare it to 10 years ago, right? Like all of the foams are getting so good that like, I don't know what's firm and I don't know what's soft anymore. And it's like, it's just getting crazier and crazier with how soft they can make these foams. But in today's market, relatively speaking, I do tend to lean towards some of the more firmer offerings, or on the firmer side of soft. So like if it's going to be a single piece midsole, I usually do like it to be a little bit on the firmer side. But if it's going to be on the softer side, I do like a dual density midsole. And the reason why I'm bringing that up is when we look at something like the Vomero from last year. That had a Zoom X layer, but it also had that Cushlon layer as well. And so you have that kind of firmer base with the softer topsole. The other thing I kind of look for is I actually do like having some forefoot flexibility. I mean, with how many speed days that I do and with racing and how stiff these shoes are getting, I actually do like having some bend in that shoe on all of my other efforts. And that actually translates to the track as well, ironically. When I'm going real long and I know I'm doing a long, steady effort or a hard effort, like maybe I will opt for something a little bit stiffer, like a super shoe. But for the most part, I mean, when you look at the shoes that I've picked over the last little bit, I mean, the GT 2000, I'd argue, is on the more flexible end of trainers. Like, it has the flex grooves. You can bend it. Vomero is actually really flexible in the forefoot. And then, like, the Endorphin Speed 4, even though it's plated, I mean, there's a good amount of bend there, right? So I actually do like that feel. Cyclone 2 as well on the track. Like I said, very flexible. So I actually do like flexibility in most of my daily training runs. And when I'm on the track, when we are, if I'm doing like an 8+ mile tempo run or something, and it's going to be pretty close to race pace and we're putting a lot of hard efforts in, like, okay, I will opt for something a little bit stiffer, probably a little bit more resilient foam, like a more super shoe type of offering. That will mimic it, because ultimately I do feel more economic in some of those models when I am doing those types of paces for those types of efforts. I do think there still is something to that, but I think if I could have it my way, for most daily efforts and on the track, like, I tend to opt for things a little bit more flexible, and more moderately cushioned as well. I'd argue that a lot of the shoes I just pulled up, none of them are really max cushion per se. Maybe the Vomero is the closest to that. But other than that, like, everything else has been relatively moderate. I mean, the Endorphin Speed is 35 in the heel, give or take. Did they raise it?
I think it's up at 40.
Is it Endorphin Speed's at 40 now?
Yep.
Yeah. I think it's the same.
Yeah.
All the other models were like 36, I think.
Mm-hmm. I'll look at our specs here.
Yeah.
Keep going.
Anyways, but that one, like, A6 GT was like 30, 37.
Of course, David's right. 36, 28.
I'm telling you, man, I know my stuff. Cyclone 2 is on the lower side. Yeah, because I remember the Speed and the Pro were distinctively different for that reason.
That's good.
And
yeah, there's basically you're basically saying there's basically no foam in the Endorphin Speed.
Yeah, it's a
minimalist shoe.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm just kidding.
Moderate, quote unquote, by today's standards.
We
got trainers at 47 and 50 and 45. Like, it's getting crazy, man. Like, to think there's on that shoe 10+ millimeters more than that,
it's crazy
on some of these trainers. So I tend to fall more on the moderate side. I'm not going to say minimalist, I mean, a minimalist shoe is, there are still shoes out there that are under 20 mils, So
I got to do a call out. So somebody rightfully on, I can't remember if it was YouTube or wherever, for Innovate's shoe that they were nice enough to send us. It was it's not high. It's more like lower stack by today's standards. And I wrote the DPT thoughts on, like, wearing minimal shoes during casual wear for, like, foot, not strengthening, but foot training or whatever you want to call this. And
stimulus.
Foot stimulus is the best term.
gives some form of stimulus.
The Innovate shoe is not a minimal shoe. And I'm like, well, by today's standards it is, but by normal standards, I guess, not. It's funny how things are changing in terms of
I do think on that point, though, it's important that, like, the stimulus that you get is different depending on what you're used to, right? So, like, if I lift 10-pound curls every day, because that's all I can handle, and I do that for 10 years, and then I grab 1 pound, like, that 1 pound is different than the 10. So it's not going to give me as much. But if I've only been lifting 1 pound all the time, and then I grab 10, just the difference in the stimulus, that was a terrible analogy. We could, like, cut that out because it didn't actually, like, make the message that I want. But the point is, like, you are getting a different stimulus from something like that Innovate shoe if all you've been in for the last 5 years has been something with 45 millimeters or more. Whereas if you've been in something like the Innovate shoe, it's forever. It's not giving you a stimulus that you're not used to. So it's not going to promote anything different. That's terrible. Terrible word.
On that note, Nathan, talk us through what you like in your shoe in the midsoles.
Now I got to keep talking. Yeah, I would say when it comes to midsoles, especially this year with my foot stuff, I think there's a few things that I look for. Very similarly to David, cushioning is one of those things. I land in a very similar spot as David, liking kind of that firmer end of soft or the softer end of firm. Right in that middle ground for me is usually my sweet spot. I would say that I have drifted towards I've enjoyed more soft shoes this year and the year before than I have in years prior to that. But the really crazy soft stuff are never my cup of tea. Like the New Balance 1080 don't really get along with it super well. The More V5 don't really get along with it. I'm just listing New Balance shoes. The Balos don't get along with it. Yeah. Like don't get along with like those super soft things. So I like a little bit more firmness to it, but I like some level of compression, but I don't like it to be mushy compression. So I think of it more of like unit compression, which is why I do like the Super Blast. I didn't pull that shoe out here. And, like I think the Nova Blast fits in that category. The Elios has been fitting in that category. I just like a little bit of kind of unit compression.
Would you say resilience? Because all those shoes have a decent amount of bounce to them.
Yeah, so I would say maybe any sort of compliance they have is balanced by the resilience in the foam, so that it kind of all comes back at you. But in addition to those characteristics of how soft or firm or compliant the foam is, I do look a lot at heel construction for geometry and forefoot construction for geometry. So I definitely this year don't like a lot of toe spring where the platform is rounding up a lot and it's holding me there. And then I also, Matt, this is for you. I always want a nice heel bevel if there is any posterior heel flare. Many companies are doing a pretty good job at that, but I just want enough where I'm not going to have the heel get in the way. And then the last thing that I look at as well is bending stiffness in the forefoot. Like you, David, I like to have some level of flexibility. And I think that saying, oh, this shoe's plated doesn't really mean anything anymore because of the variety of types of plates that people are putting in shoes. And I was going to do the exact same thing with the Endorphin Speed. Like this shoe flexes like a trainer that doesn't have a plate in it, but the plate stabilizes the foam. The stiffest shoe that I have up here is the Deviate3 from Puma, which is definitely a stiffer shoe, but I use it for particular types of runs. And it's got a really nice gradual rocker that fits my foot really well, which is why I get along with it. Otherwise, every other shoe that I have up here has a decent amount of flexibility, but still operates off of some form of rocker. So I don't want it to be completely flexible. Like I didn't run in the Magnafly as much because it is an extremely flexible forefoot. I like to have that higher stacked amount in the forefoot, and that cushioning creates a slight amount of rigidity. And then another shoe that I had up from last year is the Clifton 9. Really liked that shoe. And it's flexible in the forefoot, but it's got enough foam that it's slightly stiff. So that's kind of my jam, is looking at kind of those four components on the softer end of firm or the firmer end of soft, having some sort of flexibility in the forefoot, but not completely flexible, nice heel bevel, and not having a lot of toe spring.
I'm going to add just one really quick random caveat to all of this. And that's going to be, this kind of goes by the wayside when I start talking trail specific.
Sure, yeah, totally.
Looking at categories, because I've been really digging.
You mean like the Evo Pro 1, your go-to trail shoe?
Yeah, I'm man. Yeah, bombing technical downhills and Evo 1s, that's how it be. But no. But when I look at like a Speed Goat, it's like the exact opposite of everything I described, right? Like very rigid platform, like, very grippy, rockered platform. I will say this one does have a little bit more of a snug upper, which I do like, just in general, like I don't want it to be super tight, obviously. If it's like squeezing my foot, that's not good. But if it has like a light, gentle squeeze when I first put it on, I know it's going to break in a little bit and it's going to fit me well. That's what the Speed Goat is for me. Another one, kind of looking back, and this one's a little bit more roomy, but Ultrafly from Nike. Again, really rigid, decent amount of sole flaring. Upper is a little bit more synthetic. It has a good hold to it when I lock down. So I think where I'm going with this is it can be task dependent too, depending on the scenario of what you're looking for and what you're doing. So like when I go and I look specifically at a trail shoe, if I know I'm going to be hitting pretty much an entire trail run and I'm not going to be on road much, I'm going to look at a very different shoe than I am on a normal training day when I'm running.
Yeah.
So
also, I just have
change.
I have to throw Tecton X3 in there for trail shoe for my preferences. That shoe's dope. I want that carriage on a road shoe too.
That'd be sweet. I just need that upper to not fit me slightly small, which I think might be my own issue of I think I am a 10, 10.5 and no longer a 9.5, 10, but that's a me problem. So what I'm hearing from you two on soles is, as David mentioned, obviously it's dependent on the task at hand. And I'm trying to decide, do we have enough time to dig into how you choose race day versus trainer versus other trail, or should we probably save that from the rest of that? Might be an entire episode in and of itself. But we'll probably save that for another day. But what I'm hearing from Soles is, David, you want something that has at least a little bit, if not moderate, forefoot flexibility for most of your daily training. You're looking for something that has cushioning, not mushy, but maybe just on the slightly firmer side of soft. There's not a lot of stuff that's actually firm anymore, as you alluded to. Nathan, you mentioned that you're looking at the whole thing in terms of you want to make sure your toes aren't being held to extension with too much toe spring. You want to make sure there's a decent heel bevel. If there's any posterior flare that helps you roll, it doesn't get in your way. And you want that forefoot rocker to, again, be just right, where it's really transitioning nice. It's not overly flexible. It's not super stiff for most things. You just want to feel like you've got a little bit of flex so that it feels at least natural for you and how your foot is. So you can be comfortable. Correct me if I'm wrong in those statements.
Yeah, I think it translates into race day too. I got two shoes right here. I've got an Anta C202 GT5 and a 6 Metaspeed Edge Paris. I'd argue those are on the firmer side of racing shoes as well by today's standards.
Mm-hmm. I'd agree, and I'm with you on that too. My shoes that I've liked for racing have been the Edge, and going back,
Anta C202 GT5.
No, I've never tried an Anta shoe, but the Endorphin Pro 3 was one of my favorites. And this is gonna sound crazy what I'm about to say, and you could maybe
what's crazy
kick me off the pod, but in comparison to some of the other ones, the Vaporfly 3 isn't that mushy soft. Like it's
not
still
compared to like a SC Elite or something,
right? So that I enjoyed racing in that shoe too, but it feels again, because we're so acculturated to this type of foam, like I feel like that's a reality.
I agree with you. I don't think, and this is a conversation from the day. I don't
acculturated.
I don't think ZoomX is the softest or most compliant on the market at this time, which is just part of what happens when you have a larger sample size of now pretty much everybody has, there's still one that we know has one. They just have to debut it. But pretty much everyone has some kind of super foam, true super racing shoe out there. So you've got a lot more different things to figure out. And hopefully it becomes less, it's obviously more confusing to people because there's more options, but hopefully people learn to go, how can I get better at finding a shoe that works for me or you or them? My last question is probably one of the more challenging ones, but the one I've been looking forward to the most. And I am still formulating this and I haven't quite figured it out. So I'm going to talk for as long as I can while I try to figure out the last piece of this and try not to breathe too much while I continue talking. No, I'm just kidding.
The last pizza? This?
Yeah, So I was trying to figure out how to ask this as a pizza question.
Was it really a pizza question?
Yeah, it really was a pizza question.
Oh my gosh, I read your mind.
Yeah, so just had formula. I've been thinking about it this whole time. We'll try to manage this at the same time.
I'm just making a Matt pun.
No, it is pizza.
Wait, for real?
Yeah, for real. It's a pizza question, but I'm still trying to figure it out. You guys are judging me. Still trying to formulate it.
I was just trying to throw a pun right back at you, and it turned out it really was pizza.
Yeah. So, all right, how do we do this? I need to crowdsource on this one. So, like, do we talk about like the different parts of the shoe and describe? Yeah, let's do that. So if you had to describe the different parts of the shoe, we'll keep it simple for right now. Actually, no, we're going to do the outsole, midsole, and the upper. If each one of those things is a pizza, what would it be for each one of you?
As far as like what we're looking for in said pizza?
Yeah,
like,
let's put it into like what you're looking for. Like maybe if the shoe is a pizza itself and like you're breaking it down, Nathan, go.
Yeah.
I'm thinking about like building a pizza and like the sole is a certain part of the pizza. Maybe it's the crust, like that kind of thing. Okay.
Yes.
Oh, okay. I was thinking like outsole was its own pizza.
We could. That's what Matt was saying.
That's what I was originally going through, but I like this.
I'm
almost
good
like
with that. I'm okay with that because what you look for in an outsole, like if you want like this coarse, grippy outsole, or you like it a little bit more slick, and I don't know.
Yeah, but we didn't talk about that. And I've already started us like landing this plane, and now I'm going to feel awkward. So let's do building the whole thing.
The whole thing. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
So if your perfect shoe was a pizza, walk us through how you build it.
So I do think that it feels like low-hanging fruit, why would I use a food analogy with a different food? Terrible. But I think it feels like
this guy likes pineapple on his pizza.
The type of the crust has to be the midsole for me.
You better not say Hawaiian pizza. I'm kidding.
No, like the type of
you about
crust.
to put some pineapple on there?
No, I'm not putting pineapple on yet. But the crust is maybe for me one of the most valuable parts of the pizza on first take. And so I lean towards like New York style pizza has some thickness to it, but I love deep dish, but I don't want it all the time. And I like thin crust. That's like all we have around here, but it doesn't feel substantial enough. So again, I'm right in the middle on all of my midsole desires. So my crust is going to be my midsole, and it's going to be kind of New York style, traditional thickness crust. And then I do think that one of the parts of pizza that maybe doesn't get sung enough glory is the sauce. And I think that the sauce for me when it comes to shoes is the geometry, because there are a lot of foams that are similar, but the ones that I gravitate towards end up having the heel bevel and the rocker and the amount of stiffness that make it really fun for me to run for an hour and a half in the shoe. So I want a nice sauce with some basil in there, a little bit of extra flavor. And I think that's what the geometry does. And then I just want a 4 cheese topping. I don't want anything else. I just want really good upper, which is my cheese. And I just want it to taste delicious, but like it shouldn't turn me away from the pizza. The thing that's going to make the pizza a star is going to be the sauce, which is going to be the geometry. Done. David's turn.
So Nathan chose New York style 4 cheese pizza with a little basil in the sauce. Okay, got it.
Yeah, I don't know if mine's going to be quite so elaborate, but when I think of a shoe and I think of pizza, I'm thinking of kind of like a chicken pesto artichoke, maybe a little bit of bacon on there. And I'll tell you where I'm going with this, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a thin crust here. I actually don't want a thin crust. Give me just a normal crust. Because when I think of thin crust, so when I'm looking at the way the pizza is oriented, I'm picturing a shoe. What is on the bottom of a pizza? That is a crust. That is an outsole. If it's really, really thin, it might break down really quick and it won't hold very well, and it might not have the greatest traction. But if it's a deep dish and it's like really, really thick, like that might be too much. I was going to say too much sauce, which is a bad.
I knew you were going to say that.
Which is a bad pun for this, because we're not talking about sauce. We're talking about crust. Too much bread. For
though I think that there's the most sauce in deep dish, more sauce and fillings than there is crust. I think the crust is still actually pretty thin.
Yeah.
It would basically, I feel like super trainers are deep dish pizza.
I could get behind that. But I just want a normal crust, like the crust, like just give me something that's going to grip the ground pretty well. It'll last for longer than one marathon, like just something that I'm not going to slide out in, that I can just have some basic trust in, I mean, like, I feel like that lines up pretty well with these guys that I pulled up, They're not the thickest outsole. Well, actually, but the Edge Paris has lasted beautifully, actually, I will say, from an outsole rubber standpoint. Surprisingly good. But anyways, that's besides the point. It's a normal traction. Like, it's nothing to like rave about per se, but it works well in pretty much every situation I've put it in. So a very just normal pizza crust. When we look at the sauce, I feel like if you're throwing down a pesto sauce, it's not like, it's a little bit fancy, but it's not like, it's not so outrageous someone hasn't heard of it, right?
Sure.
And so I feel like that's like your normal run of the mill, like that's our Piba midsole, but it's not something that's so crazy outrageous that someone's doing crazy geometries and things like that. Like, this is something that's still predictable enough. What is your objection here, Nate? I want to hear it.
Not an objection, but is there anything more Santa Barbara than saying that a pesto sauce is just a very normal sauce?
What the heck, man? Why you gotta do that to me? Why you gotta do that to me? I think of like, it's like artisanal, but it's not like outrageous. Like, most people have heard of that.
Yeah.
You want more than just like an EVA of 2017. Yeah. You don't want just a red sauce.
Something nice, right? Like, I'm not going to make that on my own. I'm at a restaurant. I'm ordering something that's a little special, right? But it's not so special that I'm like, oh, I don't know. Give me, I don't know. What would be a crazy fancy sauce that you would see on whatever?
Probably a pesto sauce or something.
No. I hate you guys.
All right, before we derail anymore.
So, and then, the cheese and the toppings would be the next little things. Chicken, not that outrageous. You had a vegetable, artichoke, spinach, whatever, not that outrageous. A little bit of bacon for some flair.
Got it. So I'm hearing from David, he wants a bacon, artichoke, cheese, pesto, normal thickness crust pizza is what he's building out. And so the consistent theme I'm hearing is, despite all the crazy stuff on the market, everything's going to be different, but it's funny that you two are both gravitating back toward the normal stack height stuff for trainers. We'll have another discussion on racing shoes and all that stuff. But like for normal everyday stuff, sometimes the quote unquote normal things tend to feel better when you're just trying to get miles in. That's totally okay to feel for those of you that are searching shoes. There's a lot of options on the market now. You can go for the craziest stuff. If that's working for you, it keeps you healthy, it keeps you excited, great. If you're just going to figure out what works, if more minimal stuff works for you and keeps you getting out the door and keeps you healthy, great. I think for this group, and hopefully I'm not speaking for everyone out of turn, but I think when all said and done, when we actually finally get to pick something to put on our feet, it's usually a little bit more traditional, a little bit more quote unquote normal, not nearly as fancy, unless we're doing something fancy like a workout or things like that. And even then there's some variation. So the purpose of this episode was really to help you see behind the scenes of not only how we're looking at this stuff, but also how we figure things out for ourselves. Because you know that there's a lot of information out there. We've talked about the RunCat. That's a great place to start. And so if you are a starting runner, that's a really good tool to look at. And as Nathan mentioned, you can take a look at the episode that he did talking about that. For those of you that have got a little more advanced or are going, is it okay for me to be looking at these things? Hopefully this gives you a view of, there are specific things and there were similarities and differences between what Nathan and David were looking at. And that came from experience of paying attention, going, what works for me, what doesn't. And that's something that evolved. It might change. Nathan, I don't know if I can speak out of turn to this. Do you think you had different preferences and fit before and after you had some of your foot stuff going on?
Totally. It was a different deal for me.
Yeah. So things do change, and that is totally okay. My example is I used to think I was 9.5, 10. I think I'm starting to realize I'm a 10, 10.5, and I'm going to have to start maybe asking for some 10.5s. We'll have to see. Things change. So like I said, hopefully that was helpful to give you some background in how we do this, some deeper insight. And also hopefully it's helpful for us to start bringing back the pizza question. I'd like to start bringing that back and have that be more important. So as always, we appreciate you listening.
We probably spent like 15 minutes talking about pizza.
We did. That's okay. But I feel like that's the OG list. The OG listeners will appreciate that. Now. Good. That's
how do y'all feel about Domino's? You guys like Domino's?
I think it's fine. My favorite is Papa John's for like the fast stuff. Papa John's, that's my jam.
All right, I'm going to pull a Portland hipster and say that my OG favorite was Pizza Cotta Pizza 20 years ago, back when I was a kid. And now they've gotten franchised out a little bit, and it's not quite as good, but it's still good. And that's kind of a more Oregon-specific
brand. Do they have Pizza My Heart out there?
I don't know. I don't think so. But New York style is hands down, in my opinion, the best every time. The couple times I'm over there, that's always the greatest. So as always, we hope this helps, and you can find us on many different channels. We've obviously got this on Spotify, iTunes, and a variety of places you can find podcasts. If you want to view this, you can view it on YouTube and other areas. We've got tons of stuff coming out on those platforms. We've got a YouTube channel. We're always putting out some more individual videos and the long-term visual form of this podcast. You can find us, as always, with the original stuff on our website. We have lots of different other socials between Instagram, LinkedIn, which is continually impressed me with how much interaction we're having on there. Some really, really cool things that are going back and forth, and X and other places. You can always find us, and you can always contact us. Although we are a little slow with emails, you are always welcome to send us stuff, and you'll probably end up a mailbag if we don't get you directly, because we do find what you all think and say to be very important, because we are doing this for you.